Hi, my name's John Dickinson. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Equal Experts, and we have been running our expert talks online for about 3 or 4 weeks now. And over the last few weeks, we have had some quite technical talks. We've been covering topics such as DevOps, programming, different programming approaches, how to effectively use pull requests, and how it's more effective in a remote first delivery setting. But this evening, we've got Paul Stringer, who's our head of mobile, joining us. And he will be talking more about mobile strategy and how that relates to enterprise, mobile in the enterprise. So I'm going to hand over to Paul now. Thanks very much. And we'll catch up a bit later for the Fishbowl.
All right, thank you, John. Greetings, everyone, from a lovely, pleasant evening here in Wickham, which I don't know if you know where Wickham is, but we are midway between Oxford and London. I know we've got groups. This is going out to different groups from, I think, around the country and also maybe even around the world. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of where I am. So just hello to all you people, wherever you've come from. I know it's the evening. You've given up a little bit of your time for this, so I do appreciate it. And I'll keep this short and hopefully make this a really good session for everybody who's taken the time out. So let me just, well, before we get into it, just, isn't technology fantastic? Even in the current conditions, we get to do this. We get to somehow all join each other and still continue to do these things that otherwise it would be very difficult to do under the present circumstances. And I'm just going to get my slide deck up. We are going to have a little bit of a slideshow here and share this. And John, is that looking good?
That's perfect.
It's
Brilliant.
showing. Fantastic. Okay. So skip the main screen and just go to the next one. I have been sort of lucky enough to live through probably 3 great technology revolutions in the past 30 years, I would say. Now, back in the early part of the last century, you were lucky if you saw 2, maybe 3, maybe you got to see the car and the television and maybe just the beginnings of something else. But if your math is good, you'll see we're getting one about every 10 years, which means we're probably tantalizingly on the brink of the next one, which means I might actually get to see another 3 or 4 of these before I'm done, which is kind of exciting. And I suppose is why so many of us are attracted to technology. The first, I'm sure many of you will remember, for those old enough, was the personal computing revolution that started with the Apple II in the 70s and throughout the 80s with the Mac and then Windows, which really took it out to the masses. The second one, whoops, we've gone backwards. Try going forwards. There we go. Much better to go forwards than backwards. The second one was the information superhighway, or the internet, as people more familiarly know it now, but I'm still quite fond of that term. It looked like this. It was very, very exciting stuff. And that reached this immense global scale in about 15 years off the back of that first wave of personal computing that had come before it, that had taken about 20 years or so to kind of really meet mass adoption. And then the third one, you probably know what we're getting to here, was the mobile revolution that started back in 2007. That revolution only came about because of the first 2 that were previous to it. The advancements in mobile computing driven by laptops, the development of battery technology, NiCad, lithium ion, those types of things which didn't exist before, this need to bring personal computing into kind of away from the desktop, led to all the stuff that meant that it was possible to build this type of device those 12, 13 years ago. And on the other, in parallel, we had the development of mobile phone technology, which of course led to this, but created this pervasive ambient connectivity, which meant that we could do so much more with this thing than we had been previously when they were not connected. So I was talking about this period with a friend of mine, Mike Abidak, and he's on this today watching this. And we were kind of reminiscing about this because we're both old enough to remember and enjoy kind of this historical look back at how we got here. And he pointed me to this incredible documentary about this period, which I'd actually missed. And it kind of captures a moment in time between these 2 waves of the internet and mobile computing. And it's about a company called General Magic. Actually, that's what the documentary is called, but it's about a company with the same name. Unless you were like me and had a special interest in the waning fortunes of Apple Computer in about the mid-90s, this one might have passed you by. So if you're interested in this part of the story of how we got where we are today, and really this very unique, special period of time, I really recommend it. It's an amazing story about where this mobile computing revolution came from. Here's the logo of the company, which is gorgeous. I love it. And because it's really fun, I really want you to see it. I'm going to play the trailer for you now about this influential tech company that has kind of changed a lot about the world around us, but you've never heard of it. So we're going to just run the trailer because it's a good one. So let me get this up. Here we go.
In 1990, there was no digital telecommunications industry. It did not exist. There were no digital cell phones. There was no World Wide Web. We're going to create what comes after the personal computer.
And it was a telephone. It was essentially going to be a smartphone with a lot of intelligence in it.
When we were talking about reinventing telephony, we meant it.
We're trying to make something that people love. We need it to be like your watch, your glasses, your wallet.
We decided to make everything. That meant we were custom building every piece. It's insane.
How small will it finally be, do you think?
Someday, Dick Tracy wristwatch.
This was the beginning of what became, I think, the most important company to come out of Silicon Valley that nobody's ever heard of.
It was this aura of secrecy. You know, it had Apple's fairy dust sprinkled on it. So we had no idea what it was. But by the rumors, it seemed just captivating.
We had no choice but to keep quiet about the things we were doing because other companies were interested in it as well.
Now, it should be noted, John Sculley was running Apple at the time.
He was our ally, or so we thought.
Today, we are launching Newton, a revolution for the pocket.
They had decided to make something essentially based on our original models.
It's the most important thing that I've ever been involved with in my entire life.
It's bad enough you get betrayed by them, but now they're going to try to put you out of business.
That was fighting. That was battle.
I mean, here's a test. What if General Magic never happened? Would we have had Android?
Not a chance. I mean, all these things were linked together, one after another.
So much of what came out of General Magic is the foundation of everything we take for granted today.
And so the question is, can we take these powerful tools and do something that really does help a lot of people?
The reason you should care about the story of General Magic is because it involves something fundamental, and that is failure isn't the end. Failure is actually the beginning.
All right, so check it out. It's on iTunes. It's on Amazon Prime, I think, as well. It's definitely worth a watch. And if you've got kids as well, and they don't really know much about kind of where all this stuff came from, it's a wonderful historical kind of capturing of that moment and where much of this stuff that we take for granted today came from. And what's amazing is that it kind of really had to be dreamed about by people for it to exist. It didn't just kind of come by accident. It's really something that was very, very intentional and about this technology that we take for granted today. Anyway, so can we take these really powerful tools and do something that will help a lot of people? That was what I think it was probably Megan Smith, and she was the product design lead on that. She was in the video there, who then went on to do lots of things at Google as a VP and then became CTO of the United States for 5 years or so. And this is like a theme that I think drives us on and on when it comes to technology, and especially mobile technology. And if you really want to build something that can help a lot of people, then it has to be mobile and it has to be useful to them. So that is something which I think we can all kind of still reflect on and use that as a guiding idea. So if you really want to help a lot of people, one of those places you can do that is in the workplace, right? Now, we are getting to probably the later stages of this mobile technology revolution. I think we're just seeing the start of where it's going to impact next, which is in terms of reinventing what work is, building what's happened with personal computing, and now making more people more productive and more engaged in the work. And it should do. This is a place where we spend a great deal of time, right? This number, which I came across a little while back, staggered me. There are 2.7 billion people worldwide, and that's employees. It doesn't even count all the other people who aren't officially registered as employees, who don't sit behind a desk. You can see the industries here. It's construction, healthcare, agriculture, transportation, manufacturing, hospitality, and education. You know, it's pretty hard to grow corn in an office. There's a lot of this work that has to happen out in the real world. And these are some of our biggest global industries, mostly happening outside, mostly happening remotely. Now, with the emergence of mobile devices and its adoption within the enterprise, innovation is no longer really constrained to the subset of office-based tasks, which were made for office workers like our guy here, and which actually only cover 20% of what the world does when it's at work. So let's just categorize what we're talking about here this evening about mobile in the enterprise. We have mobile office workers, the road warriors. This is actually a growing sector of the workforce because of mobile computing now allows office work to happen outside the office. We've got our guy here, he's got a really good email. He's very happy about that, but it's still office-like work. It's still typically like the kind of things we were probably doing back in the office. But there's a second category of the workforce, which I think is the one that we can really focus on, or the one I'm focused on this evening. And that's field workers or deskless workers, as sometimes we call them, people working in the sectors that we talked about. And this latter group are the ones that make up around 80% of the global workforce. They don't work in an office. And this just blows my mind every time I think about it, because I have to keep reminding myself, because it's easy to forget if your job is mostly in an office or behind a computer, that this is actually the reality for most work. I thought it was maybe 50-50. I didn't realize it was 80-20. So with the adoption of mobile computing reaching into more of these areas of the workforce, I think we're on the brink of this major change and a chance to innovate with new apps for these workers and their work. So with the adoption of mobile devices in business, it's time for enterprises to really make advantage of this, of these advanced platforms and devices, which we've never seen before available to this type of work. You know, I would think about why is this occurring now? And it's because if you think about it, desktop computing has, you know, defined how we interact with computers. We've had to conform to it, but now computing is much more conforming to us. It goes where we want to go, to where our work is. It doesn't force us to return to an office to complete that work. So this is a tremendous opportunity to improve productivity and the experience that people have in their work. And we want to help enterprises to take this opportunity and not get left behind or miss it. You know, that would be a shame. And so I'll give you a real example of this. I want to share with you a story of a client that we worked with. They're in the retail sector, and it's one which if you're in the UK, you'll know and love. It's Co-op Food. Now, I've missed a few slides out here. This was some data that I had on currently, I suppose, why the innovation here is still so exciting, because up until recently, only 2% of all investment in software and hardware went into these workers. 98% of what people invested in companies in IT goes on desk-based software, hardware, and solutions. But it's changing. So 82% of companies are planning to increase their spending on this workforce. So they've spotted this and are realizing that this is the place to invest because the opportunities are there to make that a real good investment in their people. Now, going back to the story I want to tell you, it's about a company we worked with, Co-op Food, who they made an estimated productivity savings of about £1 million over the course of a year after introducing one mobile app. Here they are. This is Co-op in Northern Ireland, Finnegan's Co-op. And what they asked us to do was to come in and help them with an efficiency drive. You know, the retail sector is very, very competitive. Everybody's looking to save costs, pass those savings on to customers, and remain competitive. So we were there to help them with this, this idea, this goal that they had. But they didn't want to do it just by slashing sort of, what they were paying suppliers, etc. They wanted to find smart ways to do this. Now, when you go into organizations like this, you're looking for where are the inefficiencies. And it turns out that retail is still the one incumbent technology that you keep coming across in retail and other places is good old pen and paper. It's super easy to deploy. Most people already know how to use it, and it's really cheap. And it's quite hard to dislodge pen and paper from the real world. It really is. And we've found a ton of it. And one place that we really found where it felt like, the opportunity was there to make it an awful lot better than what it was in the area of managing people's shifts, people coming into the stores to making sure they're at the right times, which looked like this. It was very paper-based. There was a back office system, but the way that people would find out what their shifts would be literally looking at pieces of paper that were printed up and put in the staff room, which you had to go to the staff room to be able to see when you were due on. Now, this was all managed by the store manager in the back office. There was a single PC that hooked into the rota system they had, which is all fine. Maybe you can set this up at the beginning of the week and it's not going to take too much time to get that up. And then you print everything out, you put it on the wall, and hopefully that works for the week. But what actually happens is real life happens, right? Stuff goes on. Cars break down, you can't make it. Your kid gets sick and needs to be taken to a doctor's appointment. Or your cat gets ill, and just needs to, you've only got that one slot at the vets and you've got to go and do it at that time. You've got to call up every time, and the guy back at the office, he's got to now shuffle everything around and reprint out all the sheets. And then everybody's got to be updated about that. And very inefficient process. This is how people would find out about this stuff. And if you're not in the store and it could have changed since your last shift, how do you find out, right? So we thought this was a great place to try and improve things. And there were other reasons to doing this. Not only was it his time that was costing money, but also not getting the right shifts was commonly cited by people as a reason for leaving. You can imagine this. If you can't get the right shifts that fit in with your life, then that can be a problem. And it could be a reason why you might look for some other work instead. So that has a cost to it as well, because you've got to retrain people and you've got to hire them and bring them back in. And so you want to make sure that you're not losing people unnecessarily. So we talked to the staff and we said, well, what would you like? If we could design anything and build anything, what would it be? And they all had a really simple answer, which is really obvious when you think about it. It was all like, just give me like an app on my phone. My phone's with me everywhere. Tell me when things have changed. Let me look at what's going on and let me manage our own shifts together without it all having to go through a centralized system. Sounds great. Like, this is obvious stuff. You could solve this with a group chat, right? Put it on mobile. You could use WhatsApp to do this. In fact, it turns out this is what people were doing already. The people in each store had already found a little bit of shadow IT, which is WhatsApp, and we're working around the system currently to make it something that was a little bit more applicable to their life on mobile. Now, this is still a hack though, and putting a rota system on WhatsApp probably still has its edges and isn't a particularly wonderful experience, although it was probably better than the one they had before. So we decided you could probably do something better than that, and we built them an app that they could run on their phone, that they could all access to, and which basically took that whole system and put it in the hands of all their employees and colleagues rather than just the managers themselves. So they could all basically delegate this task to each other and almost create a sort of peer-to-peer network way of doing this, which really saved the manager a lot of time. And it also reduced the sense that maybe reduced the point of friction. This could be a real point of friction for people if they couldn't quite get the right shifts and they couldn't get hold of the manager. And that really helped many different ways, the employees. So I could talk a lot about it. I could show you the app, but I think it's much better just to hear it from the people themselves. So we're going to ask, we're going to get Tasha and Janet to give you a little taster of what it meant to them. What did they think about this new piece of enterprise IT that they were expected to use? So let me play the video.
I found out about shifts through my manager. It was really easy to do. It definitely felt like everything was going to be easier. I'm going to know what I'm doing on my days off, on the days that I'm at work. I've got it 3 weeks in advance, and I also know what other people are working as well because I have it right on my phone. I can check my shifts whenever I want.
I can plan my hospital appointments and holidays and things like that, so it's much, much easier.
Shifts being rolled out to all colleagues in the co-op. I think it's a really good idea. It's made my life so much easier and everyone else's life so much easier.
I think it's a really useful tool. I can't say why anybody wouldn't want to use it. It's so easy to use, it's so convenient, you know, you can just plan your life around it really.
Here you go. Janet nails it. So convenient, so easy to use. Why wouldn't anybody want to use it? And this is talking about enterprise IT. When was the last time somebody talked about enterprise IT like that? And really, like the reason for that is because mobile lends itself so well to these kinds of use cases. And the nature of it means that you can build these really simple tools that anybody can use, very, very different to what we've had in the past in terms of when we think about enterprise IT. So, you know, like the numbers speak for themselves. They had an 85% opt-in adoption rate. It was not mandated. People could choose to use it. And that was just, you know, after a couple of weeks. So this is what happens if you build enterprise apps people actually want to use. And my whole idea here is that I think enterprise apps built for mobile are much more likely to get used and much more actually people will want to use them. And as such, you're much more likely to get a good adoption, which is actually what leads to kind of making a difference. And the reasons for this are pretty obvious. Now, if we don't, so enterprises have to kind of, I think, take a different approach to how we previously thought about building enterprise software, which might typically just been about buying it in, and it may not have been that well suited, but it would probably do the job. People's expectations of what technology can do have drastically changed since when we were growing up and what we've been used to. If you were born in 1997, you'd be a 22-year-old college graduate today who from the age of 12 grew up with the iPhone, the App Store, and apps would be the center of your experience of computing. Simple, fast, delightful, useful, you know, all that kind of stuff. And if we don't recognize that this shift in expectation has happened, enterprises potentially risk making the mistake of producing, you know, moving into this space, but producing really subpar apps, which could leave people feeling a little bit cheated, you know? And here's why I think it's really important and something we do need to think carefully about as we kind of embark on this phase. And it's what I call, you know, the experience deficit, which potentially is there waiting for us. The reason why there's an experience deficit that maybe wasn't there previously is because, again, these apps that we're developing and putting onto phones live alongside apps like Instagram, WhatsApp, FaceTime, Uber. Right, they're not sitting alongside products like Excel, which is albeit a fantastic piece of software. You don't think about it as kind of a wonderful user experience, whereas on a phone you do, because it really has to be, because on a phone, the user experience has to be so much better because of the limited constraints in terms of input and stuff that you have. And that's why I think apps lend themselves really well, because they really do provide a kind of really good user experience that's really, really tailored for the device and the form factor and the user interface the people are used to. So I think these apps need to be the baseline for what apps should be like. They shouldn't be the aspiration and be okay with falling short of that. Because I think if that's the case, we'll find other ways to work around systems, either by WhatsApp or whatever. So we almost have to compete as well with those products, and that's why the experience has to be good. So, you know, this is a really big opportunity, I think. We've seen why the numbers of the scale is across 80% of all the work in the world. And a lot of that work currently still exists on running either on laptops that are particularly fantastic, or many cases pen and paper. And so it's a pretty easy thing to improve upon, not just a little bit, but massively. And in this country, you know, I'm sure we're not alone in this, but we are also facing something of a productivity puzzle, right? Where despite advancements in technology, our productivity seems to be stuck at a level. Now, I don't know the reasons for this, and a lot of people puzzle over it, and I'm not sure it's kind of, you know, attributable to to mobile technology or whatever it is. But what I do know, or what I do believe, is that one of the ways we can increase our productivity is to kind of shift our focus away from knowledge-based workforces and stuff that happens in offices to this much bigger opportunity, which is the 80% of people, as I've said, which are doing work out in the world. And the trick to getting that productivity and the adoption is building these user experiences, which are really, really sort of tailored to mobile. So it's something that we're doing here at Equal Experts as well. So we've built some internal apps for our use cases that we had, and building some other ones that we may be able to share some stuff about in the coming weeks. And that's really everything I had and wanted to talk to you about today. I've written an article on LinkedIn about this. So it'd be really cool if you're interested in this space, if you wanted to go to that URL at the bottom, leave some comments or just have a look at that. That'd be awesome. Be great to kind of connect with more people who are kind of interested in the enterprise space. And that's really it, I think thank you for listening. I hope that was interesting. I hope it maybe got you excited about what we in the mobile technology space still have left to do to make a real difference to people's lives. That's it. Let's leave it there. I think we're going to have a little bit of live Q&A now. So John, I'm going to hand it back to you because I think you know what happens next.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you, Paul. That's excellent.
You're welcome.
Well, first of all, apologies to everybody who was trying to get in. I think there was one of the links we shared was maybe for last week's, but hopefully a few people have overcome that. And what we're going to do now is we are going to share the we're going to go through do a fishbowl where we actually will take questions from the audience and we'll invite members of the audience to come and join a fishbowl. We've preempted this a little bit, so we've got a few people that are ready to sort of get us kicked off. The idea for a fishbowl is start off with a question, a theme, have the panel talk through that, give their opinions of it, give a bit of back and forth, but then also anybody in the audience who has got something to say, to contribute, to come forward, put your hand up and on Zoom, and then Steve will bring you in. So what we're doing at the minute is the virtual equivalent of shuffling the chairs. So in a fishbowl, we move all the chairs around. So there's 4 chairs in the middle, everyone's going around the outside, and Steve is bringing in the initial members of the panel. While we're doing that, can people, if you've got any questions that you'd like to for us to cover in the fishbowl, or a question that you'd like the panel to start with, ideally based off of Paul's talk, any thoughts that are raised from that, if you can put them in the Q&A panel. So there's the 2 little speech bubbles with Q&A underneath it at the bottom of your screen. If you click that and then put in your question, and we'll have a few minutes. We have got one prepared just in case people don't have anything particular. Mm-hmm. So while people are thinking of a question that they might want to see covered, Matt has got a question there saying, Paul, hi Paul, Co-op Shifts looks like a fantastic app with huge benefits. Well done. My question relates to distribution and how we can get these enterprise apps onto end user devices. With Bring Your Own Device, we cannot expect personal devices being enrolled onto a corporate MDM. So I had experiences in the past with Apple being very quirky about approving an app that isn't designed for the wider audience. Do you think Apple and Google's attitude has changed with this? And then we've got, so if people want to have a look and open up the Q&A, we've got a couple of questions now. If you want to vote these up, and these will be the ones that we start with at the panel. And then Tony has put a question in there. How do you ensure you're not disenfranchising people who, for whatever reason, don't want to use an app smartphone? So Paul, rather than you, I think you're just about to dive into answering that. That's great. The first one, certainly. We'll use one of these 2 actually, rather than the one that we had prepped, which is brilliant. We've got 2 votes for the first one. Oh, there we go. It's flying away. Okay, so So what we'll do is we'll boil this question from Matt down into something that the panel can pick up and run with. Then if we run out of steam, then we'll go down to the next one. And then if we run out of steam, we'll go down to the next one. But I would encourage people from the audience, once we get going and into it a few minutes, put your hand up and Steve will bring you into the panel and boot out the person who hasn't spoken for the longest period of time. And then we can keep the fishbowl moving. And the last point I wanted to make was we have a scribe. Duncan Cheshire, I think, is acting as our scribe. Duncan, actually, we'll leave you off the panel just for now for your own sanity, if that's all right. And then you can come in and do the scribe, do the playback of all the questions afterwards. So that's a summary that will run at the end of the conversation that the panel's had. Okay, so I think I've talked for long enough. I think I've described the process and how it's going to run, and I'll keep nudging it along as we go. But the question for the panel that we'll start with, and if we just keep it to one person talking at a time, but jump in, jump out, use sort of social signals to say, I'd like to talk now, is Matt's question, which is about distribution. Do you think Apple, so the challenges around distribution of mobile apps in the enterprise, personal devices are not necessarily unrolled onto a corporate MDM. Apple's been quirky about approving apps in the past. Do you think Apple and Google's attitude has changed towards this? Paul, or anybody?
Start with, anybody else? Does anybody else have any experience they want to jump in with here?
I can talk a bit about the enrollment aspect of things. So in June last year, 2019, Apple announced a new way to do the enrollment as for personal devices. So it's now possible to actually enroll a personal device on your enterprise MDM. So you only get you keep all your personal data, all your apps, because it's your device, but yet then get access to the apps from your company. And for all the security, they're creating different partitions on the in storage. So it means that if you leave the company, for example, you can be unenrolled and all the data from the company leaves your device. So I don't have any personal experience running this because it's quite new, but I believe it works the same way as the fully enrolled non-personal devices.
And when it comes to the, Apple being quirky about approving apps that aren't designed for a wider audience, I think that is still the case. I think they look at it as we are providing as much as we can tools like the stuff Jules just talked about to enable you to do this without publishing, slightly strange things that aren't for general consumption. A big change that I know is probably going to affect people more than they maybe realize at this point. So a lot of organizations already have enterprise certificates, but after we had a little bit of the faux pas from Facebook and Google, I think a year or two ago, where they were found to be using enterprise certificates in a way in which basically they were circumventing the App Store to do certain things to roll out apps that weren't going to make it on the App Store. They're now tightening up the rules about who will get enterprise licenses and basically saying that unless you've got a really, really special need to have one, which is probably going to exclude most people other than maybe the government and a few other people like that, you will be distributing your apps via the App Store. But important distinction is that not all apps distributed by the App Store have to be published and visible in the App Store. They can be made exclusively available to individual organizations. So you can develop an app for your internal use. You can submit that to the App Store. It will go through the normal app review process, but it will only be visible to a particular enterprise that you specify, e.g. your own. So I think that is the way they want everyone to go. And I think that is going to continue. I don't think we're going to see any change in that. In fact, anything, I would see more of a tightening up of that rather than it being, wide open. So I think the answer really is to the BYOD situation needs to be kind of solved, and that's where you need to get people on board with that to be able to kind of roll stuff out and go down that enterprise deployment route rather than the App Store route.
Paul, I've got a question for you on that, actually. Is this why Apple introduced Apple Business Manager relatively recently to address these sort of concerns about BYOD and perhaps streamline the process for approving apps for enterprise use outside of the enterprise program?
I think they've been you know, seeing some of the friction that people have with it, and they've been working on it. I think there was something called Apple Volume Purchase Program before this.
Yeah.
And I think that basically took a whole bunch of disparate little bits and pieces they had, and they've wrapped it all up into a new thing called Apple Business Manager, which is, for those who don't get into the intricacies of how enterprise distribution works, this is just one of the tools which enterprises use to basically use as a front for the App Store, so they can see apps and they can basically purchase them at a volume purchase level, or select specific apps that have been made available to them by other enterprises, and deploy them internally. So yeah, I think they've just done a lot of work to improve BYOD, as well as the other approach, which is simply organizations buying the phones and giving it to their staff, but then you carry 2 phones around with you, which is, you know, it's okay, but you know, maybe one app, one phone is better. Question relates as well to Google. I mean, we must remember that Android is also a very big product and platform out there. A lot of enterprises also use that, and I'll be upfront, I don't know as much about how Google approach this, but I think it's very similarly modeled on the same approach that Apple do.
And
so that more to say on this.
Okay, and so it's the same done through the Google Play Store.
Well, you know, so you do have, I suppose it is quite different in terms of you are able to sideload onto devices, right, with Android. So not everything has to go through an app store as much as it does with that. And for that may be a reason why some enterprises maybe prefer a little bit more to go down that route, because it feels like a little bit more like you own the device that you've paid for. But on the other hand, also enterprises do, I think, really like some of the limitations and restrictions that come with Apple's approach to this for security and other reasons. So I think, you know, Apple have been surprisingly incredibly successful. You know, just going back to the video earlier, the idea that at some point in the future, Apple would be the default choice for enterprises in hardware is yes, they've come quite a long way.
Okay, great. So as a reminder, if anybody in the audience wants to join the panel and share their opinion on the question, you raise your hand, and then Steve will bring you up into the panel. But
it looks like Matt got his answer he wanted, so I'm pleased about that.
Brilliant. But we'll go on to the next question. So Tony's question has now got a couple of thumbs up. And he is asking, this is a great one, how do you ensure you're not disenfranchising people who, for whatever reason, don't want to use an app or smartphone?
I can provide an interesting anecdote on this one, if that's all right.
Go for it.
Yeah, sure. So you got to consider what the alternative would be. So if you're an employee, you do have to use something else if you're not going to use that app. In the case of Foot Asylum, people were having, the app that we were building was intended to replace the older way that employees were doing product and stock lookups, which was over a headpiece, a radio that was prone to being crowded with chatter from various different shop floor people wanting to request product information at the same time. When we put the app into the hands of the people that were eventually going to be using it, they were blown away because it vastly improved their user experience. So I think if you show people what is possible as opposed to what they're doing right now, then it's easy to kind of alleviate those concerns. You know, another way of thinking about it would be a lot of other shops, retail shops, that use barcode scanners in the shops. And if you think about it, that's a single-purpose device that can be very, very expensive. Not unlike, you know, when you used to have one device that was a camera, one device that was a Walkman, and so on. When you show someone a product that kind of takes advantage of a device to the full extent of its capabilities, and what's possible when you have all the sensors that a modern smartphone does, I think it's easy to bring people on side.
Can I butt in? I think this is.
Hey, Simon.
Hi, how you doing, Paul? I think there's an interesting point here. So I think people will not. They won't refuse to use their device or not be happy to use the device, but it's just the security aspects. So I think you kind of covered a little bit in the previous question, previous question, where we were talking about what kind of security aspects are taking control in the device. But the other part of this is that it doesn't have to be the only solution. It doesn't have to be that the enterprise app on the mobile is the only way to activate the data or to access a task that you're doing. It doesn't have to be immediate, and you still have to cater for other people who have other accessibility issues, that we've seen in kind of government as well. So I think the gentle migration of people to mobile enterprise is one way to do that, but also you've got this other huge cohort of younger generation that you mentioned in your great presentation, Paul, that are expecting things to be on mobile whilst everybody else moves across. And you see this co-education where people who are younger start to show people who are less familiar or less comfortable with doing work on their device how to do that and the advantages that they can get, and they kind of trail behind, So I think that once people start to adopt it, as we saw in the co-op video as well, once some people start to use it, everybody wants access to it. And that's one of the benefits, I think, of this kind of gradual rollout of enterprise and the approach that you guys are taking.
The other approach as well is to simply, you buy all your staff a phone. But and it seems to be the case. It seems to be one of these things that organizations have kind of gotten for free, is that people are bringing with them into work incredible personal computing technology that businesses get basically to take a free ride on by people bringing their own devices into work. But I think that, for those that aren't, that don't, I suppose the question here is not about so much about people who don't have a smartphone, maybe they do exist, but more who don't feel comfortable using an app to replace some particular system, or maybe they like the way they do it right now, and they don't want to shift over to something else.
Does anyone from the audience want to join and give an opinion on that? Or Tony, have we understood the context in which the question that you're asking? I think there is obviously, there's sometimes in the just bring your own device. We won't necessarily always have smartphones where some people might still be using feature phones. So the point about bringing your own, providing devices for employees is a good one. But I see, Rob, you've joined. Hey, great. Have you got, is there something you want to say?
Yeah, it's kind of building on what was already being said about bring your own device and actually bringing technology into the workplace. Back in, I think it was about 2009, I was working at Asda, and my team were asked to build an application for store users and store managers, because basically similar to what you described there at the co-op, Paul, where what store managers would do first thing in the morning, it was like their morning prayer book, and it was just basically a huge printout, ticker tape printout of all the items that they had in stock and all the rest of it, and they would go through it line by line and then have a big huddle and they get people to go off and do stuff. And what we're asked to do was come up with a way of simplifying that through via a report. And back then, we had a cohort of about 10 stores that we were going to use as guinea pigs. And only one store manager actually adopted a simplified, exception-handled business intelligence MI tool that we created for them that they could see on their BlackBerry. We got it working on that. And none of the others just wouldn't adopt it because they liked having that great big chunk. It made them feel important and stuff like that. Moving on a number of years later, we were trying to, again, sort of trial bring your own device. And as you said, people started getting a bit more used to using mobile devices, et cetera, within the store infrastructure. The problem we had about getting people to adopt it was before that, stores had a policy of you weren't allowed to take your phone onto the shop floor because you should be there working. Yeah. bring your own device basically meant that, yes, you could use the applications on the phone to actually help you with stock stuff and all the rest of it, see what your tasks were for that day. But where we got into question marks and the unions ended up taking over was saying, yeah, but if they bring their phone onto a shop floor and they drop it, whose responsibility is this?
Mm.
And it's one of those things that, particularly in a retail environment, you had to be quite careful about and basically say, okay, we'll buy you a cheap Samsung A10, that'll do the trick. But then it's not as quick and as efficient as you say, because some mobile phones that some guys buy, they're almost a supercomputer compared
this is the experience deficit. And so we do see that. I remember somebody told me a story about how they had to build it was kind of pre-Uber days, and it was kind of an Uber app, but they were going to have to supply people with the phones. They were like not prepared to use their own phone to do this. And so they went for the cheapest thing they could find. And as a result, not only was the development cost much higher because they had to do an awful lot of optimization to make it even just function, the experience was terrible, and it didn't succeed as a result. Maybe there were other reasons for that as well, but that was going to be one of them. And so there is that kind of idea that it's tricky to cheap out on this one. I think it's tricky to cheap out on it and cheat it because you've just got this direct comparison that you can make, and people will just feel like, well, same old. It's enterprise stuff, and it sucks. Why do we have to use this thing when what we're used to in our life is this? So I would like to turn this very quickly on its head, though. We're talking about disenfranchising potentially some people, but go back to the idea that what about people coming into work now who, for them, the current ways of working are disenfranchising them? They're just like, what is this stuff? This is nuts. And if you don't put it on a phone, I ain't using it. And if you don't make it a really nice app, then they will just feel, you could potentially be disenfranchising those people versus the people who are kind of already in and comfortable with the way things are working. So I would just sort of put that out there as an interesting way to look at that question about not disenfranchising new people coming into the workforce.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And Tony's provided some more context, which really helps, which is that obviously he knows a lot of people who don't have smartphones. So that helps. Thank you, Tony. And also, and there's comment there as if you're in a position where having the app gives some people a large advantage in organizing their shifts, someone without could feel second choice. And that is really interesting. And I think the reality is that we're moving off the paper anyway to organize their time into WhatsApp and whatever else. So everyone was already moving to shadow IT and ways to work around the paper-based system. So I think that there's just a natural progression towards that, where lack of people aren't on the same social technology to communicate will put them at a deficit. So, I mean, the co-op was seeing people already using these mobile phones and digital approaches to try to communicate, to organize their time. So this was then a natural progression. It was like people were really yearning to have something that would meet that need.
I do agree with Tony. I think the kind of legacy issue though of making it accessible to everybody, and I think the device manufacturers themselves do their best to do that, and Apple specifically make huge efforts to make the device accessible to a wide range of people. And usually when you do the study to work out what to roll out and to who, you're trialing with the people who will use it first, and then you learn from that and build that out to wider groups so that everybody's able to use it. Not having a mobile phone would be part of that rollout, where you understand how can you otherwise access the system and can still contribute, because otherwise, you're building software, again, creating, gates and entry points people can't get to. So it's a really interesting perspective. Thanks, Tony.
I think what I'd just, I'm not on there. What I think I'd sort of add to it is, particularly with your slides, Paul, where you're talking about the co-op, is certainly the case of, doing the old-fashioned sort of Six Sigma, or not old-fashioned, but the old way of Six Sigma, going into the store and talking with the associates and the colleagues within the store and understanding how they operate and how they work, in terms of that they were using WhatsApp and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That is key, and that is paramount in terms of adoption, because I've seen it so many times before where these things are just forced on the users either in DCs or depots or storefront, where somebody thinks, oh, they need to do this, rather than actually going through it and really understanding what is it they need to do and what is it they need to achieve.
Then that segues nicely. The next question we had, I don't know if we're going to have time to move to that, but it talks a little bit about this. And I think it is something we've all faced, kind of figuring out what are the apps that people should be building. John, I don't know, do we have time to go on to that one for a few minutes?
Absolutely. So I think we've covered Tony's question. Thank you, Tony. So were you segueing into Mike's question?
Yeah.
So without direct exposure to the internal failings, inefficiencies, how can we discover the opportunities to leverage mobile? And we'll keep this one quite short because we've got about 4 minutes before we close up.
Simon, do you want to take a run at that? Because I think a little bit of your background puts you in a good place to sort of just give us a quick summary of how you would approach this.
Yeah, so I mean, the way that we've been approaching that is obviously to look for to work with the stakeholders, basically, to try and understand those inefficiencies. I think with Shifts, you guys are very lucky. We're very lucky because the people working on that were already embedded within the company, working on other projects, and that's one way of EE bringing kind of benefit to that. But for us, working with the stakeholders and then doing field research, exactly like you discussed. So field research can happen in a very light way and can give us exposure to things that people are trying to do, and usually people are trying to make accommodation for better ways of working themselves, and finding workarounds, and observing those is one way to do this. And then bringing those people into early ideation, and then trying things out and rolling things across in a sort of kind of prototype phase, which is what can happen in quite a short amount of time in order to see whether something's worth pursuing. Otherwise, you're totally reliant on the top-down approach, and that kind of fields into the second questions that we're getting around. If you roll these things out from the top down, they tend to not address the real underlying issue, which is what's the cause of those inefficiencies, rather than what is a suspected cause, and it doesn't really solve the problem. It just adds another problem or another weight to the issues that users are having. So for us, getting access to the people who are experiencing the problems on the ground, prototyping with them, and trying to create solutions that help them solve those things quite quickly. I think some projects you've been working on recently kind of tie into that as well. Actually sitting in a room with 5 or 6 people and asking them if they really are the problems that have been identified by their stakeholders, and giving people the power to speak up is
and then telling the stakeholders it's not. We want to solve a different problem.
It's a great way to address it. Ask them to sit in the room and tell their stakeholders they don't want.
I'll tell you one thing. One of the quickest ways to find out what are the real failings and efficiencies is to go and we did this a little bit at one client, but one thing to do is to ask people, what do you currently use WhatsApp for at work? And they will tell you immediately the things that they are hacking and working around using a general Swiss Army knife, which is WhatsApp, to do. And it's tasks which they seem to feel are things that should be being happening on a mobile phone. So that's one really quick way to kind of find out what the use cases are. The other one was our assignment. I remember we worked with a client, and we would sort of walk around their offices looking for evidence of workaround solutions, which would be people using whiteboards and sticking things up on the wall to sort of work around failings that there were in the organization that were there, and figuring out how to solve it for themselves already.
I think the hardest part is that people don't think that the phone can solve some of these problems for them. So they think these problems are probably either too simple or too ingrained for a phone to solve. But if you look at, like, historically, and apps that are available to you in other kind of areas of life, apps are able to solve innumerable problems, and quite efficiently in a large part of your life that isn't work related. So people are starting to come around to that idea, especially when they've seen something created or prototyped at a very early stage. I think that works a lot easier.
Brilliant. Okay, I am going to pause it there. Mike says, great feedback. What do you currently use WhatsApp for at work? Is a great question. Thanks for that insight. So that's brilliant. Well done.
Thanks, Mike.
That's a quote for you, Paul, going forward. So what we've got is we're going to run over slightly because we won't answer any more questions. Thank you so much. We need to do this again, Paul, because there's been loads of questions. People want to know lots of stuff.
That's great.
Well, no one wants lots of feedback about mobile. But we've got Steve. Could you bring Duncan Cheshire up to a panelist, because Duncan has been here he comes, brilliant, has been note taking and will just give us a quick overview replay I think using a Miro board, if I'm not mistaken, to do a quick summary of the topics in the Fishbowl. So Duncan, you are muted, and if you want to unmute and then take us through it.
Sorry about that. I am now on mute. I've had, yeah. So while you guys have been chatting, I've been rapidly trying to take a few notes using the whiteboard tool online. The Miro is a quite useful tool. Nice little handy little note-taking tool. So yeah, hopefully you can see the screen. So start off the central theme, our Fishbowl expert talks, and fund it out with the first question. Has the Google's and Apple's attitude changed to allowing personal devices on the corporate network? Discussion, zoom in a little bit so we can see what we're talking about. Just going to ensued a bit about how to enroll a device onto the corporate network. Saying that Apple, yes, still has many quirks that you're driving people more towards the App Store, but there are ways to circumvent it if you are a specific big, large organization that can get your way around it. Some organizations like these quirks because it adds additional security for their corporate devices. And we expanded that into a bit around the Apple Business Manager and what that can provide.
Yeah, for people who are interested in that, business.apple.com gives you all you need to know about what that is.
Okay. We expanded down a bit further into what are the alternatives that if we can't get the organisation people to have their own devices, then it's the organisation's going to have their own kit and provide it out to people, and then have 2 or 3 mobiles in the pockets, maybe, which is, we've all seen that in the past with Blackberries for work and iPhones for personal. A little bit expansive. When we went down the Google route, we've got the Google Play Store rather than the Apple's devices. I think conversation, well, my note-taking dried up at that point. I'm not sure whether the conversation dried up, but, I was trying to keep up. We expanded out to a second question off from the panel. How do we not disenfranchise people for whatever reason? So advice about best to show people what's possible to alleviate the concerns. Some of the concern, maybe they've got security issues about devices. A bit of a chat about accessibility issues. It can be alleviated by trial, rollout, get feedback. Chat about the younger generation in the workforce may actually have expectations of better mobile experiences. This generation may be able to teach and encourage the older generation to get on board. People bringing in their own devices, the company themselves can learn and adapt from what the employees are already doing. A bit chat about in the early days, issues around phones were banned in the workplace, unions get involved. If people break the phone, who's going to pay for it? Mentioned that big lists made some people look important, and they like to keep that control and that power. So could we be excluding some of the workforce for those that want the better mobile device, mobile apps? And this will chat about the shadow IT network, people going off and doing their own thing on their own devices. That's where organisations can learn from what their employees are actually doing. We then drop down into the third question of the panel about what are the failings, how to get opportunities and to leverage the mobile. So this basic do some field research, work with the stakeholders, try to get access to people on the ground. I did get Paul's question in there as well. Ask them what to use the WhatsApp for in work, and look out while you're walking about. Look out for whiteboards. What content have they got on the whiteboards? Is there anything there that could be moved into a mobile environment? Field research, prototype as soon as you can, and get feedback. That's as far as I got, and hopefully I've captured as much of the conversation that was going on without leaving anybody out. Brilliant.
That's perfect. That's I'm going to take that quote. We're going to build all sorts of clickbait articles off the back of that. What's the one user research question you need to ask to identify mobile needs in an enterprise? That's excellent. Okay, so that is it for this evening. Thank you very much, Duncan. Thank you, Paul, for the talk, and thank you for all our panelists who joined. I think that was a really lively Fishbowl discussion. So I'm encouraged. We'll keep doing these. Thanks everyone for coming. I really hope you enjoyed it, and we'll have another expert talks next week on Wednesday at 6 p.m. BST. So hopefully see you then. All right, goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.